welcome to Classics Confidential. This week we're in London and I'm talking to Tony Keane, who is an Associate Lecturer at the Open University and an expert and critic of science fiction. Now, we arranged to have an interview today because last week you published the call for papers for this really exciting conference that's going on in 2013. Do you want to tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, the conference is called Swords, Sandals, Sorcery in Space, and it took us a long time to come up with a title that we liked. And it's then Fantastika and the Classical World, isn't it? Classical World, yes.
Yeah,
yeah.
It's a very long title, but I like it. I like the 4 S's at the start. So, Fantastika, can you just explain?
Well, the Fantastika is a concept that the science fiction critic John Clute has started using in the last few years. It's the theme of his latest book. The Fantastika is an all-enveloping term that covers not just science fiction but also fantasy and also horror. All of those genres in which there's something of the fantastic going on.
Now, I think a lot of classicists, well, a lot of people in general, they might be quite surprised to see this, to learn about this link between the classical world and genres like science fiction, which, you know, I certainly would think of as being set in the future rather than the past. Can you give us a bit of background? You know, how exactly are science fiction? It's writers, is it novelists,
well,
mainly, or?
For the purposes of the conference, we're interested in all types of genres of science fiction, whether it's literary science fiction, i.e. short stories and novels, or whether it's science fiction on television, science fiction on film, whatever. The Fantastika really has its roots right back in Greek literature. I mean, the first fantasy work really is the Odyssey.
Right.
Science fiction, people also sometimes claim that science fiction also has its roots back in Greece and Roman literature. Lucian's True History, which has a voyage to the moon. And,
yeah, of course.
I myself tend to think that Lucian is actually a work of fantasy again, because there are gods in it, and there's he goes to the moon, but then he goes to the Isles of the Dead and all sorts of stuff. But you can see that there's a tradition that begins with Lucian.
And does it go all, I mean, is this kind of an unbroken line of fantasy writing? Does it go all the way through history, or is it something that people have picked up from? It's
something that largely, I think, picks up again, say in the 17th century, the Lucianic tradition. Thomas More's Utopia is quite heavily influenced by Lucian, and that's seen as a sort of a work of proto-science fiction. Similarly, Swift's Gulliver's Travels is heavily influenced by Lucian's True History, as is Cyrano de Bergerac's Voyage to the Moon. I think the work's actually called Of Other Worlds. We talk a lot, in those of us who work in reception studies, as you will know, talk a lot about the way in which Greece and Rome are at the core of Western civilization and the core of everything that Western civilization produces. And science fiction is no different, science fiction and fantasy are no different to everything else that's in Western civilization. So you know, if you can see classical resonances, classical elements in, you know, the works of Eugene O'Neill or whatever like that, you can see them in the works of you know, Isaac Asimov. And people do exactly the same thing in science fiction that they do in other works. They go back to the classics for names.
Right.
They go back to the classics for they go back to for cultural backgrounds.
So can you give us some examples, maybe?
Well, yes. One famous example is Isaac Asimov's Foundation novels. Isaac Asimov's Foundation novels basically take the collapse of the Roman Empire, the fall of the Roman Empire.
When
in
are
the
these
West.
written?
These are written in the 1940s.
Okay.
But Asimov very openly says that he went to Gibbon's Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire and then adapts it for the purposes of his Foundation novels.
And so is he actually... Are the novels set in ancient Rome?
No, they're set in the far future. They're set 50, 60,000 years into the future when there's an Earth empire that controls the galaxy.
Yeah.
And it then collapses.
Ah,
And the collapse of the galaxy looks the collapse of the Galactic Empire looks very like the collapse of the Roman Empire. There's even a character who quite clearly is based on Belisarius.
Wow. What's his name?
Belrioso.
Okay, so it's quite
name.
explicit.
So it's quite explicit. And Asimov never denied this. He always said that he was always quite happy to admit that he pinched from Gibbon and also from Thucydides. So that's an example of taking something from the past and putting it into a future setting, and that sets the template for how galactic empires are represented for decades afterwards.
Wow.
If you go to George Lucas's Star Wars films, they are taking an awful lot from the Roman Empire and from the narrative of Star Wars. Adapts the narrative of the fall of the Roman Republic and the emergence of the empire out of that.
So there is a Senate, isn't there?
There's a Senate, and there's the Old Republic, and the Old Republic collapses, and the Emperor takes over. Now, of course, because it's an adventure story, which has a happy ending, you don't end up with the Emperor establishing a dynasty that lasts for thousands of years. You actually end up with him being overthrown and a new republic being set up.
That's really interesting. I know from reading some of your other work that there are examples of science fiction where people do actually travel back to visit.
Yes, there's time travel stories as well.
Do you want to tell us a bit about those? I mean, I'm really keen to hear about Doctor Who.
Well, the classic time travel stories are, of course, Doctor Who. Doctor Who's gone to visit the Romans a couple of times in a story called The Romans in 1964, and a story called Fires of Pompeii.
Because that was a TV episode as well, wasn't it?
And also at the end of last year in the Pandora Who Opens, they go back to Roman Britain. And he's also been to see back to the Greeks at various times. In 1965 there's a story called The Myth Makers, where the Doctor ends up in Troy in last year of the Trojan War. In 1972 there's a story called The Time Monster, in which he ends up in Atlantis just before it's destroyed. So yeah, and Doctor Who isn't the only person who does these sort of time travel stories where you go back to the Roman period. One of the classic time travel alternate history stories is something called Lest Darkness Fall by L. Sprague de Camp, and in that somebody goes back from the future to the period of the collapse of the Roman Empire. And
that seems to have drawn a lot of...
It does. It draws... There's a lot of people who get drawn to the Roman Empire and drawn to finding ways in which the collapse of the Roman Empire can be prevented. And in a lot of these there's an implicit sense that the fall of the Roman Empire was a terribly bad thing, and if we still had the Roman Empire it would be much better.
And is there kind of a political background to that for these writers?
I think it's more the sort of, just the general sort of Western sense that that we are the inheritors of the Roman Empire in some sense, and that everything that's good in our society we can trace back to the Roman Empire. And if only we had the Roman Empire we would have had some of the nastier bits of our society. And that's very much definitely a British point of view. And I think to some extent there's quite a lot of Americans that have that sort of point of view. Maybe not necessarily thinking that the Roman Empire should have survived, but thinking that Rome should have survived in some way.
And I mean, other people who also sort of bring out the darker aspects of empire, like slavery.
Well, one of the interesting things about Sophia MacDougall's 3 novels is that she really underlines that this is a slave-owning society, and that this is a society that does not treat people terribly nicely, and that this is a military dictatorship.
And are people drawn to Greek mythology as well, Greek and Roman mythology?
They are drawn to Greek and Roman mythology. That's more in the area of fantasy to some extent. I think this connects up with something that was actually observed in the Children's Literature Conference that was at Lampeter a couple of years ago, where it was pointed out that writers tend to go to the Roman Empire for history, and they tend to go to the Greeks for myth. One thing I really want to do with the conference, the reason I've been wanting to do this conference for years, is the people who work on this. Over here we've got the science fiction people, who are working on science fiction books that have some classical elements in them. Over here we've got the classical reception people, who are working on classical elements that they find in some science fiction. And there are quite a lot of people who've now moved into this, who are now doing sort of areas and some smaller, under their own little areas of this sort of field. Back over here somewhere we've got the English literature scholars. And a lot of these 3 groups don't really communicate with each other very much. In some cases they don't even know that the other ones exist. And I've always believed that for any serious reception studies, you've got to build those disciplinary bridges. You know, if you're writing on Shakespeare and the classics, you can't just publish in Journal of Hellenic Studies and Classical Receptions Journal. You've got to go and publish in the Shakespearean Studies journals. You've got to go to the Shakespearean Studies conferences. And that's the object of this conference. It is to bring people together. It's primarily supported by the Science Fiction Foundation, which is the leading UK body that promotes research in science fiction. It publishes Foundation, which is the leading UK academic SF journal. But if I only get science fiction people there, I won't be happy. I won't feel that the conference has achieved what I want it to achieve. So I'm really keen to get classicists together.
Yeah, but it sounds like it's going to be a really exciting event. Best of luck with that. I hope you get lots of interesting paper abstracts in.
I'm really looking forward to it. I think it's going to be wonderful.
So I hope you'll come back and talk to us about how it's gone in 2013.
If you'll invite me, yes, I'll come.
Thank you very much.
Okay.